Hello everyone. This week's parsha is Parshat Yitro. It's Parshat Matan Torah, so obviously many ideas to share. Last year we spoke about why this parsha is even called Parshat Yitro. We would think the more intuitive name would be Parshat Matan Torah, but there are reasons why it's called Parshat Yitro. And for those of you who want to hear that, there's a link at the end of this clip that you can hear last year's Dvar Torah. However, now we're on the Aseret HaDibrot. And just as a quick introduction to this, the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 sayings, are often translated as the 10 Commandments, and just for convenience's sake, we could continue talking about it like that. However, it's important to note that that's actually not necessarily an entirely accurate translation. And just as two quick examples, if we're to look at the very first commandment, it says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher hotziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit abadim. I am Hashem your God, who has taken you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. That's chapter 20, verse 2. Now, Rambam learns, and many others agree with him, that this indeed is a mitzvah. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs. It's the positive mitzvah of having a emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? But there are those who disagree. Very serious opinions, even those who predate the Rambam, and say it is not a mitzvah. Rather, it's an introduction. It's just establishing God's authority. As an example, if a person walks into a new class, has no idea who the professor is, but then he sees some gentleman walk up to the center of the podium and says, Hello, I'm Professor John. I'll be teaching you the class for the rest of the semester. And then he can go on. But the first thing he needs to do is establish who he is. I'm the professor. Now that you know I'm the professor, we can go about teaching the class. So according to the Bahag, and I believe others, so this Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm Hashem your God, that's just establishing the fact that I'm God. There is no mitzvah here. It's just a preamble to all the other mitzvahs. So in that case, if this is really supposed to be the 10 Commandments, really we're down to 9. But then we can, of course, complicate it because we go into the supposed second commandment where it says, Lo yelecha elokim acharim al panai, right? You shall not recognize the gods of others in my presence. But really, if we go all the way through, and we don't have time, but if you're to read that full commandment, there are 3 commandments, according to some opinions. There's Lo taseh lechafes elchol tuna, says Lo tishtachaveh lahem v'lo ta'avdem. All these are actually different mitzvahs, but they're all within something that's counted as 1. So this 1 turns into 3, and the first of the 10 Commandments turns into 0. So how do we calculate the 10 Commandments? That in itself is a very interesting question, but all I'm saying is they're not necessarily 10 Commandments, just as a quick intro. Now moving on to the central idea I really wanted to discuss is this is based on a midrash. And I believe that Vilna Gaon is the one who popularized this, but all the same, it's based on a midrash. And midrash says as follows. So as a quick preamble, so we know that there are Aseret HaDibrot, right? There are 10 commandments, just for convenience's sake. Well, how are these 10 commandments given? They're given on 2 tablets. There are 5 on one tablet and 5 on another. Now, why were they given on 2 tablets? Which, by the way, is a very interesting question. After all, the central tenet of Judaism is that God is one. So what is God doing when he comes to give the Torah, splitting it into 2 different tablets? What's happening there? Rabbi Tatz talks about this. We're not going to go there. It's an amazing idea. We just don't have time, so we need to keep going weiter. So on the one tablet, there are famously the mitzvahs ben Adam lamakom, between man and God. After all, the very first one says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. Lo yelecha elokim acharim al panai, you shall have no other gods. Clearly between Adam lamakom, between man and God. Fine. Then what are the second tablets? Those are between Adam l'chavero, between man and his fellow man. How are we supposed to treat him? That's lo tirtzach, right? You shall not murder. Lo tinach, you shall not commit adultery, etc. And we'll see all of them. What the idea of the midrash conveys, amazingly, is that the first mitzvah on tablet 1 and the first mitzvah on tablet 2, they parallel each other. They have common themes. So too, the second mitzvah on the first tablets and the second mitzvah on the second tablets, again, parallel each other. And that's what this Dvar Torah is really going to be focusing on. So how do we see that? What is the first mitzvah that we're given on the first tablet? So we just read it. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, etc. I am the Lord your God. So what is the idea here conveying? The idea that recognize that God is God. Recognize Him. You have to acknowledge His existence and His presence, and the fact that there's something to honor and to give kavod to, and you have to recognize the fact that God is God. Okay. Now we look to the first mitzvah on the second tablet. That is to say, Lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. What's that teaching us? So we need to ask ourselves, why does a person come to murder somebody else? And there are a number of answers, but at the end of the day, it's because this person's existence offends him. this person, whoever this is, John Doe, is just frustrating me, he's getting in my way, or I'm jealous about him, whatever. The point is, my life would be better if this person didn't exist. If I could just wipe him off the face of the planet, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to get rid of him. That's how a person comes to murder somebody. However it is, again, through jealousy, through anger, whatever it is, this person needs to be gone. So we see the common element here is, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm the Lord your God. Recognize God. Lo tirtzach, do not murder. Recognize that this person has a right to exist, independent of your will. It makes no difference what you think or what you want. Therefore, recognize God. Recognize this person's right to exist. There you go. 1 to 6. What's the second mitzvah? Lo yelecha elokim acharim al panai. So what is it saying? The whole mitzvah is effectively saying, you shall not have other gods before me. Okay. So what is it saying? That effectively you cannot worship idols, because that's spiritual adultery. At the end of the day, the Jewish people have a relationship with God, which, by the way, is beautifully exemplified through the Haftarah of Bamidbar. Bamidbar is the, and I actually think that's how it works out this year as well as last year on Shavuot. Erev Shavuot is Shabbat, so Shavuot falls out on Saturday night, and that Shabbat on Erev Shavuot, what do we read? We read Parshat Bamidbar, and the Haftarah for Bamidbar actually talks. It's the Haftarah from Hosea, where effectively it's well worth reading. If you have our school, it's on page 1180. If you don't, then in Tanakh it's Hosea chapter 2 verses 1 to 22, where it effectively talks about how the Jewish people went and worshipped idols. But the way it talks about it is as a wife who is disloyal, who is adulterous with her husband. She went to go sleep with all of these men and all these trees, hoping that they'll give her things, and that's effectively paralleling the relationship that the Jewish people had with foreign idols. That is to say, they betrayed their husband, who's God, and they went to sleep with these other husbands who are represented by the idols, in the hope that these idols will give us something. So we see that element of marriage between the Jewish people and God clearly reflected all across the literature, be it Tanakh, be it in the Talmud. It's virtually everywhere once you see it. But okay, so that's again the second mitzvah. How does that parallel itself in the seventh mitzvah? In the second mitzvah on the second luchot, lo tinaf, do not commit adultery. Perfect parallel. Moving on, we have mitzvah number 3. What is that? Lo tisa Hashem Elokecha lashav, ki lo yinakeh Hashem et asher yisa Shmo lashav. You shall not take the name of Hashem your God in vain. Now, what does that mean? So the mitzvah here, and by the way, sorry, and then paralleling that number 3 on the second tablet, which is mitzvah number 8, is you shall not steal. Now that is a sensitive point. It does not mean that monetary stealing. What it actually means is, and Rashi talks about this, because here it says lo tignov, but in Mishpatim, next week's parsha, it says lo tignovu. Lo tignovu, next week's parsha is talking about stealing people's money. Lo tignov means you shall not kidnap somebody and sell them into slavery for labor. That's what it means. Okay, so we're going into 3. It says lo tisa Hashem Elokecha lashav. You shall not bear witness against God in vain. You shall not take the name of Hashem your God in vain. So what's that saying? When a person has a certain level of familiarity with something, then it becomes much more informal. For example, going to the Prime Minister or the President. Let's just, for a friendly sake, we'll say President Trump. Not trying to harp on him. We go to President Trump. If someone were to come to him and be like, hey, Donald, yeah, Don, that's extremely disrespectful. Regardless of what your political beliefs are, to address the president by his first name as if you guys are pals is not a very respectful way of speaking. So too with their parents. A person usually does not call their parents by their first name because that's considered disrespectful. That's almost like offending that parent-child relationship. So too with a professor, it's very unlikely that you would call them by their first name unless they give consent. But even so, there's a certain level of formality that you show somebody by treating their name with a certain amount of respect. So we see in this third mitzvah, you shall not take the name of Hashem your God in vain. You're effectively disrespecting God by taking His name in vain. Because you're saying, what's in a name? It makes no difference. Who cares? So that's what's happening. And so too that's paralleled in you shall not steal. That is to say, you shall not kidnap someone and sell them into slavery. Why is that? Imagine how offensive that is to a person's dignity to take a person, literally supplant them from where they are, and then sell them for some money in order to work them into hard labor. You've effectively completely denigrated the individual. So you see how those two parallel each other. Moving on. Number 4. Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. That is the positive mitzvah to do Kiddush. Now what happens? Amazingly on Kiddush, most people, I would say, have a custom to stand during Kiddush. Maybe not for all of it, but at the very least for part of it. And the question is, why? Why is it that we stand during Kiddush? So amazingly, that's because you're giving testimony to the fact that God created the world. And according to Jewish law, when a person gives edus, right, they stand and give testimony for something in court. Witnesses stand when they're giving testimony. And therefore, the Jewish people, when they're saying Kiddush, we stand, because we're giving testimony to the fact that God created the world. Now, what is commandment number 9, as in 4 on the second tablet, is Lo t'taneh v'rachad shaker. You shall not bear false witness against your fellow. Why is that? Because you're testifying falsely. A person who doesn't keep Shabbat is testifying falsely. They're contradicting the fact that God created the world because they refuse to testify that that's what He's doing by keeping Shabbat and by making Kiddush. And by the way, just as an interesting, because I once mentioned this over to a family member, and the family member said, "Well, with all due respect, how do you know that God created the world? You weren't there." That's a really good question, and truth is I was actually stumped. I didn't know what to say because unless I wasn't there. So I gave an answer, be like, okay, fine, maybe we're not testifying that He created the world, we're saying He is the creator. But even so, that's more or less the same problem. So I asked somebody, okay, so how do we know that God created the world? How can we testify? We have no idea. So this person responded and said, well, hang on a second. Let's ask something else. When we say Kiddush, what do we say? We say 2 things. Of course, naturally, we talk about how, God created the world in 6 days, etc. But then we say something else. We say, very interestingly, so I just need to find it. It says, so Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. This is after Bor Pri Hagafen. Asher kitchanu v'nitzrav v'ratzavanu Shabbat kodsho v'avav v'ratan yinchilanu zikaron la'aseh v'reshit chila l'mekrei kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, as a remembrance for the exodus from Egypt. Now, with all due respect, Shabbat is a lot of things, right? God created the world. That was the biggest miracle of all. He created something from nothing. So why are we mentioning the zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, taking us out of Egypt? What does Shabbat have to do with that? That doesn't really seem to work together. And if we really want to deepen this question, this is actually reflected in the Torah itself. It doesn't reflect itself here. If we're to look in Parshat Yitro at the mitzvah Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, the only thing that's mentioned is creation, the 6 days of creation, and then Shabbos. But if we're to go to Parshat V'etchanan, where the Torah where the Aseret HaDibrot are mentioned again, what do we see? Something very interesting. It says Shamar Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, right? And then we're not going to go through all of it, but we keep going, and then we see in chapter 5. Verse 15, again, this is in Sefer Dvarim. It says, "V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim, v'yotziacha Hashem Elokecha misham b'yad chazaka u'b'zron hatuyah, al ken tzivcha Hashem Elokecha la'asot et Yom HaShabbat." What does it say? And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Hashem your God has taken you out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore Hashem your God has commanded you to make the Sabbath day. Ma inyan zeh etzel zeh. What do the two have to do with each other? Those seem to be completely different, completely opposite. Or not opposite, but unrelated ideas. So said Rabbi Berkowitz of St. Louis, he said, what happened during the Exodus of Egypt? God effectively turned over the entire natural world order. Just as an example, with Barad, with the plague of hail, it was fire encased in ice. Usually those things don't work together. If you put ice near fire, the ice will melt. Or if you have enough ice, then I guess it'll melt and it'll douse the fire, and then you have no more fire. So you either have one or the other, but you cannot have both. But the point is, God effectively reset the natural world order, and the Jewish people witnessed that. All of Egypt also witnessed it to their upset. But the idea is, the fact that we saw God change the natural world order was an indication that He was the one who created it to begin with. Just as a mashal that might be a little difficult to resonate with, but I think it's a useful one, is, as an example, a person who designs a computer program, right? The computer program will never change itself. You need the programmer to go in and change the program for it. So too, God went in and he programmed the world to have a natural world order. Only God himself could go in and change the laws of nature. We humans can't change the laws of nature. God can, because God created it. So the fact that we witnessed the exodus from Egypt is giving testimony to the fact that God created the world. So fine, so we see the link between the 4th commandment and the 9th commandment. And then finally, as a quick sum up, we have the 5th, which is what? Which is, right? You should honor your father and your mother. Now, how does that relate to the last one, i.e., lo tachmod eshet recha, right? Etc. That you shall not covet your fellow's house, you shall not covet your fellow's wife. What does one have to do with the other? How does honoring your parents have to do with not coveting other people's things? So, as a quick idea, and this is probably the most abstract of them all, was a person, and this is especially prominent nowadays, people are frustrated with their parents, they're angry with their parents. Why did I deserve this lot? I should have had a better lot, had better parents, or who were in a better situation, or had a better circumstance, or whatever it was, or people who knew what I was like and taught me better, or were better able to relate to me. Whatever it is, whatever person's complaints against his parents, he'll have them, he'll complain and be like, look, if I had something else, then I would be better off. Then it's actually reflected in lo tachmod. Because lo tachmod, what is it saying? What I have isn't good enough. I want what he has. I want his house. I want his wife. I want his things. Anything that he has, or like whatever lifestyle he's living, I want that to belong to me. Not wow, look, I'm inspired by what he has, and therefore I want to work hard so that I can have that too. That's not what it's about. It's like, I want his. That is like, I don't want a house like that. That's the house I want. I want his. Whatever belongs to him. I want that car. When a person thinks like that, what's he saying? Whatever I have isn't good enough. So too, that's reflected. A person who can't be grateful to his parents for what they gave him is the same kind of person who will never be grateful for what he has and will always covet somebody else's things. Sorry for the long idea. Beautiful idea. Shabbat Shalom.